Hello, everybody. My name is Kevin Joels. I am the I'm a division chief of EMS in Lawrence Douglas County in Lawrence, Kansas. I'm also the EMS section chair for the IAFC. Today, we are having a great opportunity to listen to three great presenters to talk about the GEMT, and it's titled GEMT MythBusters. I think you all probably know where your bathrooms are, but if you need to go to the bathroom, turn off your camera. Make sure you don't take us with you. But we'll go ahead and get started here. We do appreciate the partnership that we do have with PCG. We've been partners with them for several years, and we improve a lot from just having the data that they are able to share with us and the partnership that we have with them. So we appreciate that, and we'll go ahead and get started. I'll read this here before we begin. Audio is being broadcast using the VoIP technology through your computer speakers or headset. Make sure that your speakers are on or your headsets are turned on. The volume is turned up so that you can hear well. Audience microphones have been muted. And if you experience any technical difficulties, please contact the IFC support at webinars@ifc.org or via the chat function. In the upper right corner of your screen, you will find the chat and QA menus. You're encouraged to share comments and submit questions for the speakers. If the presenters have provided resource materials or links, you'll find those in the handout section, and we will have a Q&A at the end of the session. So again, thanks for sponsoring today with the Public Consulting Group. We appreciate the partnership that we have. And with us today, we've got Alyssa Narode, Garrett Abrahamson, and James Deshos, and we appreciate all of you for being here, and we'll go ahead and get started.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Chief, for the warm introduction, and we are really excited to get started today. So what we really want to discuss and hopefully bust some myths, if you will, is we kind of want to go over the history of what ambulance supplemental payment programs have been. We want to go over the guidance that came out last August 2022, what that's meant to the programs that currently exist, what it's meant to the providers we work with in terms of additional data and documentation, and then kind of like where we want to go from here. And we have a great partner in the IAFC, so what we're both working on together is how we want to close out the presentation. So I'm going to kick it off here, going over what ambulance supplemental payment programs are at a very high level and why they were created. So just to give a quick background on us, PCG, we have been around since 1986. We have been working on supplemental payment programs since 2006. We currently now work with over 550 departments in 21 states on either ambulance supplemental payment programs, Medicare ground ambulance, data collection surveys, or public safety consulting services. So we have a really wide net in terms of the things that we are able to work on. And have a lot of experience in the EMS space and with supplemental payment programs. So we're going to start off with why ambulance supplemental payment programs were created. And if you are a current provider and you provide emergency transports and you bill Medicaid, you probably are aware, unless you are in a state that has a high Medicaid reimbursement like Arizona, what you are getting in those Medicaid interim dollars can range somewhere from $150 per transport, maybe $200, maybe $300 if you're lucky, but it's not covering what it's costing you to provide an emergency transport. And what these programs have allowed all the way back to 2006 is they have allowed providers, if they are publicly owned and they bill Medicaid, to recoup some of those dollars back. So it doesn't always make you whole, but it allows you to get some additional revenue. And we've been able to see a lot of great things happen from these programs for our providers, whether it's hiring staff, getting new equipment, building new stations. They've been able to do a lot with these funds. And As I think the other slide also pointed out, in 2006, PCG worked with the state of Texas on behalf of Austin Travis County to establish the first CPE model. And we'll get into a little bit more detail about what a certified public expenditure or CPE program is. But we were able to set that up with them. And since then, there's now over 30 states that have some type of supplemental reimbursement program for emergency services providers. So they are definitely popular, and we want to keep them around, which is why we wanted to have this discussion today. So there are a couple different ways that ambulance supplemental payment programs can work. Typically, the one that we see the most, and is, I would say, the most favorable and popular for public providers, is certified public expenditure forms. So we'll get into a little bit more detail on these, but essentially what it means is that if your state has a fee-for-service program, so you're billing fee-for-service Medicaid, which is the traditional Medicaid, you bill for a service, you get paid back for that service. Providers can fill out an annual cost report, collecting a bunch of data. And from there, we figure out what it's costing providers to provide an emergency transport. And in most states, they receive some type of lump sum payment at the end of the year. Some states have done it prospectively, where they do an add-on rate. But it's usually one of those two mechanisms. And either way, you're still getting reimbursed for those Medicaid transports you're providing. The other type of program that we've seen, and Florida is a great state to highlight this in, is you can also have a managed care or intergovernmental transfer program. We did talk about that type of program for providers in our last webinar that we did with IAFC. And it just has a little bit different mechanism, and you are given a directed payment through managed care organizations, and it does require providers to put up a state share. But it also has a huge benefit just because a lot of states tend to have pretty large Medicaid managed care populations as well. And then the last one, and this one's definitely more geared, it can be for publics and privates, or it can be done jointly with a public and private program, are provider assessments. And so those usually are created through a mandatory tax that's put on all providers to fund, the state share to then get back providers some additional reimbursement. So, I feel like which states use this changes every time we kind of go over this slide. But as you can see, these programs are very popular. And as you can see, there's still plenty of states that are trying to implement these types of programs. So this is where states currently have either active programs or states pursuing a program. And you can see, I would even say that, we could probably fill in more of these states as well, because there's just been so much interest in the past. So the ones, and if you're listening in from a state that doesn't have a current program or one pursuing it, I can tell you that we've spoken to providers in many of the states that are grayed out as well. And it's really just about, getting the right people and stakeholders in the room to try and get, some of these programs moving forward. One thing we wanted to highlight, and I apologize that this slide's a little small, at least on my screen, but hopefully you can see it, is these are some of the states that we have worked in and still currently work in. And you can see just over here, all the way to the right, the total revenue for our clients. So these are the clients that PCG has specifically worked in. But we're over $1 billion, in terms of the revenue that our clients have received. So these are really, really important programs. It gives a lot of funding back to our EMS providers in the community. So, we really want to see these programs continue to grow and maintain, the work that's been done thus far on these types of programs. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit here and specifically talk about the current supplemental payment programs and the CPE programs, because that's really where the guidance that we're going to focus on in the second part of this presentation. has been given around. So the way supplemental payment programs traditionally work when we talk about fee-for-service claims is that they allow the providers to make up the difference between what they're receiving when they internally bill for Medicaid transports by completing an annual cost report. And then they receive usually a supplemental reimbursement, usually through what we call cost settlement process. So they sign a certified public expenditure form saying, these were my costs. This is what it cost me to provide my services this past year. And then they usually get a lump sum payment. In some states like Illinois and Iowa, it's a prospective payment. So they still go through the process of filling out the cost report, but the payment is then applied to future payments. So when they bill Medicaid, they're billing it at the higher rate. And that's how they receive their interim payment. So there's different mechanisms to get that additional reimbursement, but it still requires an annual cost report. And that's where we've seen some of this guidance come out with CMS. So when we talk about that, you're going to get some type of additional payment back, but it doesn't cover everything. That's because these certified public expenditure forms allow you to draw down, if you will, the federal share of the portion of the payment. And so, I threw a graph up here. But if you say the FMAP, it's right around 60% in Florida. I think it's like at 59 point something right now. But say it costs you, we fill out the cost report, complete it. It says it costs you $1,200 to provide a Medicaid transport. You, throughout the year, bill Medicaid. And when you bill Medicaid, you get $200 for that transport. So your net cost of what it's costing you to provide that transport and what you're missing out on is that $1,000. So in the FMAP, or the federal match percentage, it does differ in every state, and it's based on the makeup of the state and federal poverty levels. It gets updated every year. But I wanted to use an easier round number for purposes of this. But when you are taking a look at the FMAP, what you want to do is you would get 60% of that back. So, and I apologize, my numbers are slightly off here, but the federal government would give you back $600, and what the state share, or what you're certifying on your cost report, is $400. So it doesn't make you whole. You don't get the entire $1,000 back, but you do get to make up a portion of that. And here's just another graphic that kind of explains how the process works. So every year you complete an annual cost report, and we will go over some of the data elements that are required, because those are some of the things that we're seeing different data collection with the new CMS guidance that came out last year. The state then collects all the cost reports and certifies that this is the cost of the program. They're able to draw down the federal dollars, and then they disperse it back to the providers, back into their accounts where they do the interim billing. So before I pivot over to Garrett, the one thing we wanted to just kind of highlight here, because this is probably where we've seen the most change thus far, and where we might see changes to new programs coming down the pipe, is that this is usually the data that is collected on programs that have been in existence, have already been approved. So we collect expenditures, we collect CAD data, depreciation, we look at your federal funds and other revenues that you as an EMS department might receive. We take a look at the square footage, your capital usage of all your buildings and training facilities. We take a look at the billing data. And then if you have an indirect cost rate or interdepartmental charges, we take a look at that. And then we look at FTE hours. So how much time your staff are spending providing services. So this is the core of what gets analyzed and categorized and put in a cost report to eventually draw down to what is Medicaid eligible and Medicaid allowable to determine that average cost per transport. So from here, I'm going to kick it over to, I believe, James. I keep saying Garrett, I'm sorry. James, to go over the guidance and how some of these things have been affected by it. So James, I'll kick it over to you.
All righty. Thanks, Alyssa. All right, I'm going to be spending some time now going through some of the more recent CMS guidance. And this is really just to make sure that all those listening have the facts of what's going on in the world of GEMT programs. Alyssa clearly spelled out the benefits that these programs have been bringing to providers across states going back 15 plus years. These types of supplemental reimbursement programs have existed for over 30 years. And continue to provide reimbursement for providers across a lot of different provider types to help make up that difference in terms of what Medicaid pays on an interim claiming basis level versus the true cost. So can't emphasize enough, how important these funds have been to providers. And some of the more recent guidance that we've realized we've received from CMS rather, does put the program as we know it at risk. So we wanted to provide some of the background, sort of where this all started, what some of the specific areas are that CMS is really asking questions around and really digging into. And then from there, we're going to kind of open up the door to, where do we go to from here? What are the next steps ahead so that we can preserve as much of this much needed revenue as possible. So many of you may be aware of the guidance that was provided by CMS back in August 2022, but ultimately they issued an informational bulletin. It was actually the first informational bulletin that CMS put out about these GEMT programs, and we're using the term GEMT, fairly generically. We know that that's what the program's referred to as in several states, but not all. It can also be the PEMT, the ESPP, the CPE program. There's a lot of different variations, but ultimately what we're talking about here is the Medicaid supplemental payment program that exists for EMS providers today. So through the guidance that CMS issued, they really use it as an opportunity to clarify really the process that providers participating in these programs, that states administering these programs should ensure are followed. So they provided some clarification around allowable costs, what is determined as an allowable cost. They outline the procedures and templates and how those need to be utilized consistently across the federal allocation regulations. They got into some of they did clearly spell out that fire and rescue costs are unallowable under this program entirely, just to reiterate that, and ultimately raise some of the, some exploratory questions around the use of CAD data. And we'll get into some more details around that. So, to us, the bulletin, was fairly straightforward. It certainly outlined, guidance that we had been following to date. These programs, as you all, I'm sure, are aware, undergo CMS review and approval prior to these programs going live. And so ultimately, these had all been reviewed and approved by CMS. This was more of just, from our perspective, a reminder. However, the fact that this guidance was being issued and some of the components within the bulletin did start to raise some questions to us about, okay, well, where is this heading? So PCG has supported a number of states recently with the CMS review and approval process. And what we're finding is that CMS is really calling into question some of the basic guidelines and the fundamentals that have existed since the inception of these programs. Typically, the state plan amendment approval process we've seen on average take somewhere between 12 to 18 months. Where we are at this point with 3 states that we're supporting, Kentucky, Arkansas, and New York, is that we're beyond 3 years now. So it's taking an incredibly long time to go through the CMS review and approval process, just because there are a lot of questions being asked, a lot of new recommended guidance that we had never seen before. There are a number of other states, including Wisconsin and Idaho, that have just begun the CMS review process. And we do expect that they're going to be experiencing similar delays and similar questions. And so we're at a point now where, we're feeling like we need to sort of address this holistically, address any concerns holistically, so that we can be sure that these programs are allowed to continue. And for states who are coming on board that don't have existing programs, they're able to do so in a more expedited fashion prospectively. We have also seen that states with existing programs that have reached out to CMS for guidance. There's been instances where CMS has directed those state Medicaid agencies to take a more conservative approach with how those costs or allocations are being used. So that's what we're seeing with the states that are going through the state plan amendment approval process. So kind of digging into some of the main issues that we're seeing. With CMS's further scrutiny of these programs, the main issues can be sort of lumped into four main categories. So the first is disallowance of costs related to first responders. The second is requirement of a time study to calculate allowable costs. The disallowance of costs associated with readiness time and limitations on allowable indirect costs. So the first one, what CMS has recently come out with is really sort of narrowing the definition of Medicaid allowable or Medicaid eligible ambulance services, really to the physical act of transporting the patient to the hospital. So when, as we all know, in reality, there are more components that go into EMS. There's the medical treatment stabilization at the scene and the medical treatment and ambulance transport to the hospital. So ultimately, CMS is disallowing any of the costs related to that medical treatment and stabilization on the scene. So that's one of the kind of primary restrictions that we're seeing come down from CMS. The second is a time study requirement. So ultimately, CMS is disallowing the use of computer-aided dispatch data, which was typically utilized to determine the time spent on EMS for those FHIR-based providers. So we would look at the CAD and ultimately look at what percentage of the CAD pertains to EMS related transports versus what pertains to FHIR. And that served as the basis for us to determine allowable reimbursement. CMS is asking states to do away with the use of CAD entirely and focus on implementing a time study. And so ultimately, that time study is going to be used to calculate the percentage of time providers are spending on the transport. And really what that's going to entail is a survey of sorts being administered by the state and completed by providers, documenting the actual activities performed. And ultimately that information then is going to sort of feed into sort of preset allowable and unallowable categories to, again, determine what percentage of cost is reimbursable under this program. So that is the second piece that CMS has really been digging into, and what we have seen in terms of some of the major changes that CMS is looking towards. The third is the disallowance of readiness time. So with that sort of new RMTS process that is being pushed, ultimately that is only going to take into account the time on task. So what's not being included, as was included in the past, is that readiness time. And so any of the related costs pertaining to the time on call, basically, as we know, it's major component of care for many providers. That's no longer going to be recognized as allowable and reimbursable time. So, and what we've seen and comparisons that have been drawn are to similar provider types such as hospitals that do allow for the inclusion of that time and related administrative activities. So this would really be scaling back on the percentage of time that's reimbursed under the current GEMT programs. And the last category is for limitations around allowable indirect costs. And so indirect costs are another component of the GEMT programs. We're seeing CMS restricting the allowable indirect costs under the GEMT. So, as we know, some of the critical costs for the operation of EMS, dispatch, finance, IT, training, payroll, and accounting. CMS is providing restrictions around what of that, if any, is going to be reimbursable under future programs. And really just, again, sort of limiting what's allowable to the transport itself. So what impact does this have on providers? So we've spelled out just three of the major impacts, the most detrimental impacts we see as a result of this new guidance if everything moves forward as proposed by CMS. But one is a major decrease in revenue or reimbursement. So what our very high level projection is if things move forward as planned, we're expecting that EMS providers will realize, we'll be looking at a pretty significant cut across the board, both for EMS-based providers and fire-based providers. So those are some preliminary numbers we've come up with: a 60% reduction for third service EMS providers, about a 75% plus reduction for the fire-based providers. A lot of that is going to there's a lot of factors that do come into that, but ultimately that's our high level estimate in terms of what the potential impact could be to the provider community. This also, time studies come with a significant administrative burden. So it's going to require that additional data is captured that is typically not tracked today. So there would be an administrative component in order to allow providers to capture those that time study data needed to now determine allowable reimbursement. And then we're also expecting that these changes could lead to decreased program participation. So with the new requirements that are going into effect, I think we may see some smaller providers saying, well, I'm not sure this is worth the effort anymore. The upside isn't as high as it used to be from a revenue standpoint. And it's going to be too much work to get this time study implemented for our department. So those are some of the risks that we see coming out of this new guidance. And I will pass it over to Garrett next.
Great. Thank you, James. And before I dive into the what's next, I did see a question come through about, are these questions adopted and in place or proposed changes? And I think James sort of hit on this as he went through towards the end there, but these are proposed changes and the potential impacts of those proposed changes. I'll get into a little bit recommendations and our work with the IAFC right now about what we would like to see going forward to maintain the integrity of the programs as they exist today. But first, before I do, this is the public service announcement and emphasis on the importance of audit trails. Whether you have someone like PCG helping you out or you're doing this work yourself, the importance of audit trails is emphasized by the Office of the Inspector General at the federal level, planning to conduct an audit starting at some point in federal fiscal year 24, which just started October 1st. So a lot of states that have these programs do their own desk review or audit process, whether that's done by the state or an outside auditor. That work is great if you've responded to those audits before, ensuring that your cost report is in good shape and all costs are allowable. But that doesn't mean you're done and you can shred that material and throw it away. There's still a really important need to maintain records. Again, if you have someone like PCG helping you, we can do that, or maintaining the records on your own and passing that information down to a potential successor if you do leave the department, because Some states, we don't know which yet, will be included in the federal audit. So Office of the Inspector General will come in and audit the ambulance services supplemental payment programs in several states across the country. And then just building off of a little bit of where James was going with the CMS guidance. Right now, there are 6 pending states with state plan amendments. I know James mentioned some of the oldest ones have been out there for 3 years, but there are 6 programs that don't have an approval. Arkansas, Kentucky, Idaho, New York, and Wisconsin all are new programs. Washington, that has the asterisk there, they've had a program now for the last 5 years, but they had a unique provision in their state plan that needed to be reopened. And that conversation with CMS has been, quote, taken off the clock, so that CMS and the state can have further conversations about changes to the program. And the removal of their treat no transport program in Washington from their GEMT program. So what that means is there are 6 states out there that have gone through the effort to get a state plan submitted and are not yet seeing the benefits that Alyssa and James provided around these programs. In some cases, did the work 3 years ago and still are not seeing the benefits. And what we see as recommendations around these programs, they sort of align with the elements of the guidance themselves, right? Direct costs, readiness costs, indirect costs, and then using CAD data moving forward. So 3 of these deal with what is an allowable cost. And the first 2, direct costs and readiness costs, really look at, as James was alluding to, not limiting the allowable cost to only the time that a patient is on the back of an ambulance and being transported. That there's a lot more in a ambulance service and a transport service in allowable cost. First being those direct costs. It isn't just the time that you're transporting a patient. There's the treatment and the stabilization on scene that are a very big part of the work that you all are doing, especially when we talk about fire departments that have duly trained firefighters and paramedics that may be responding and stabilizing at the scene, even if they're not arriving on an ambulance. In some states, the model is a city-based fire department responds. They're the quick response unit. And the county then sends the ambulance to the actual transport. So it's those duly trained firefighters that are on scene first. And so our recommendation here, and working with the IAFC to bring these recommendations to CMS as well, is to continue to allow those costs that are integral to the transport and the life-saving medical care that's being provided. The second, on those readiness costs, very similar to an ER at the hospital, right? That open 24/7, ready to respond to whatever comes in the door or whatever is there when you arrive. And so ensuring that those readiness costs are still a part of the allowable cost calculation. And making sure that, again, that CMS is recognizing readiness cost as an allowable cost. And the third element of allowable costs in the recommendation is on indirect costs. Indirect costs being those that aren't direct medical care, but are required to run the organization. So thinking even about chief's time within the department, administrative services like audit, finance, HR, those types of things that ultimately support the cost, support the overall organization in providing those services. And those costs, again, historically in other settings like hospitals, have been allowed and allocated to the direct service that's being provided. And the fourth recommendation around the use of CAD. James alluded to this and the administrative burden of an RMTS. It's a random moment time study, an RMTS, random moment time study, where the idea in other settings is that someone would be responding to a moment in time. So what is it? 1:35 Eastern right now. Garrett Abrahamson, what were you doing at 1:35 Eastern? And I would have to reply to a little survey about whether or not I was providing direct services, if I was doing administrative services. And again, we know in the work that you're doing, providing care 24/7, you can't stop the middle of a life-saving event in order to think, okay, what was I doing at that time? Even if you're answering it when you get back to the station, what was I doing at 1:35? That's a difficult thing to answer when there's already CAD data available. And CAD data is a great tool that's tracking all that you're doing, and can be allowed to calculate that federal cost. So you're looking at transport time by staff by vehicle in your CAD data, the treatment time by staff by vehicle within that CAD data, the total time that a vehicle is out and responding to an EMS event, as well as the time that's being spent in that vehicle through non-EMS or fire-only time. So you're really already getting down to a time tracking system without having to reply to a random moment time study. And so that's the fourth recommendation that we've been working with the IAFC regarding the CMS guidance. So what does this all mean for me or for you? Thinking about states that have an unapproved program. So those that have a submitted program, if you're in one of those 6 states, 5 states, will exclude Washington for purposes here, since that program is still running. But the 5 states that have a proposed program, continuing to advocate within that state, speaking to the state leaders, making sure that effort is moving forward. Because again, until there is federal approval of the state plan that the state has put forward, there is no additional reimbursement coming back to providers within that state. For states that aren't even at that stage, that don't have a program, maybe in the early stages of beginning one, there's an old fable that the best time to plant a tree was yesterday. If not, it's today. And so in those states, really advocating for looking at the benefits of a supplemental payment program, getting as far along in the process as possible, because as we've mentioned, that approval process is taking longer and longer. So it's vitally important to make sure that you're getting that process started as soon as possible. Yesterday was better. Today, if you can't, if you're not already in that position. And the third, for states that have existing programs, at this point, not much has changed. There was some guidance around certain types of capital costs that I know states have implemented in different ways. But for the most part, the cost report is still going to be submitted. CAD is still allowed for allocating costs, and the overall reimbursement picture hasn't changed significantly. And that's where the four recommendations that we have, as Alyssa and James had alluded to, are really about preserving the benefits of these supplemental payment programs. So before I turn it back over to Chief Joels, the what can you do? Continue to stay informed and engaged and advocating within your state at the federal level through partners like the IAFC, and certainly we'll have our contact information up. PCG is available to answer questions and really to help in states that have an approved program and wondering what that means, have a unapproved program and pushing that forward, or if you're at the beginning stages of really wanting to explore what this could mean for your state and your providers. But turn it back over to Chief Joels as well. But hopefully we've busted some myths along the way and provided you with a good foundation for what the GET programs are and the CMS guidance that has been on top of a lot of people's minds over the last year.
Thanks, Garrett. We appreciate that. Appreciate you, Alyssa, and James as well. That was great information. Do we have any questions?
We do. I think I'll go to the. I know we answered the one that Michelle had, but we have one from a Kevin that says, how do states that are not using CAD data capture direct costs for firefighter paramedics on ALS fire apparatuses that provide Medicaid cover services on joint fire and EMS responses? So I'll take this one, and then James and Garrett, feel free to pile on here. So currently, as the supplemental appointment programs exist, you do use CAD data. So everything that's being proposed, as we mentioned, time studies and other potential options, we just use CAD data. If you're 100% EMS-based provider, we then look at square footage as well as looking at your FTEs to determine hours spent providing services. But the thing I would say that we've seen in a couple states after the guidance came out last year from CMS, this is specifically, I know we have to do it in Florida, we have to do it in Maryland, but the states came back with the auditors and asked for additional levels of detail within the CAD. So they asked us for not only, usually we get the incident type, the call type, and then we get, a dispatch and clear time. We also now have to require apparatus IDs. So we need to know what vehicles responded to the calls. We also need the clear time of the hospital. So we also need those fields if your CAD system can provide it. And then also what we needed last year in Maryland was an actual certification of all staff, showing that everyone was dual certified. So I would say that's been the most detailed level of approach we've needed. We haven't needed the staff in other states yet, but it's something that we could see other states asking for. And that's really to just say, yes, when someone is riding on an engine or truck, they are dual certified to provide emergency services, which is almost always the case anyways, because they're responding to an EMS call. So, I just wanted to add that there too, that there are states that have taken that guidance that came out and already have started to request additional level of detail, but we're still being able to use the CAD data to allocate some of those direct costs that get split between, a dual fire and EMS based provider. Garrett, James, I don't know if there's anything to add to Kevin's question, but I do see we got another question from Kristen as well.
Yeah, and some similarities there, certainly. To answer Kristen, your question directly, we did cover that CMS letter from August 2022, and ultimately, we're definitely in agreement there. One of the biggest points of clarification that we continue to make to CMS is that, the vast majority of times those responding to the incident are duly trained and certified. And going through this documentation process in those other states Alyssa was alluding to, we found that to certainly be consistently the case across the board. And so, our continued argument there is, these individuals, though may hold a different position, they have the proper licensure and certifications to provide the service. They need to be eligible for reimbursement as well. They need to be included in the full picture. So that's definitely a big piece of this.
Yeah, and I think to answer your other question in terms of what recommendations for capturing data in reports, I think make sure you have the most up-to-date list of all of your staff and their certifications in case a state was to come back and ask that. If you are in a state where you already are using CAD data and are participating in the program, I would definitely see if your CAD system allows you to add some of those additional fields that we're seeing some states ask for. So the hospital clear time, the apparatus IDs, just as much detail as you can provide. It also just makes a stronger case, I think, on our end to show that, when someone's responding to the EMS call, they are there to, respond to an EMS call and provide that direct medical service if it's needed, regardless if they're not the one on the ambulance and they're doing triage or whatever they might be doing. But they could provide that service.
It looks like there maybe have been one more question. Are there changes being discussed, adopted, and in place? Are the changes being discussed, adopted, and in place, or are they just proposed?
Yeah, so I think Garrett alluded to this one before he started his portion. But right now, none of these have been adopted thus far. These are all been ones that have been proposed. But I think we will see some changes. But what we're trying to do, and I think obviously what our partnership with IAFC is we're trying to advocate on behalf of the fire and EMS provider community to not adopt all of these because it'll just make it a lot. It will make it more difficult, I think, on providers, to do time studies and things like that, and really trying to educate CMS and, folks that are working on approval of these programs, that EMS works a little differently than some of the other provider spaces that have supplemental payment programs. And that, we can't put them, into the same box that we do with other supplemental payment programs in the school-based world or the hospital world.
All right. Well, like you had all kind of alluded to, there's a lot of changes that are coming and proposed. And, again, the IFC and PCG has drafted a letter that's been sent to CMS expressing our concerns on the limiting reimbursements, specifically to some of the states that we just discussed, but not limited to Kentucky and Arkansas and New York. So we'll kind of wait to hear how that plays out there. In addition to that, the IFC and PCG will be having ongoing meetings with state EMS chiefs and going forward to see how we can advocate and preserve the programs. And as well as later this month, the IFC and PCG are going to be having some meetings with our staff liaison, Ken LaSala, on this particular topic. So it seems to never stop, and we appreciate the work that all three of you, plus your the rest of your group is doing, not only for the IFC, but for the EMS as a whole. So thank you all. I don't see any other questions unless something popped up in the last minute.
We did get one more.
Oh, did we? I missed it.
Yeah, it just came through. Do you see the use of ICD-10 codes for individual providers on ePCRs being required to justify the cost of the service? So I might let James or Garrett, they might know. So the one thing I'll say is that we don't ever, when we're collecting data, we don't ever, at least yet, have to get into looking at individual ePCR data. We usually look at billing data from a higher level standpoint of just looking at the claim, the procedure code, and not getting into those individual patient care reports. But I think, with the staff that we have on our public safety consulting team, I think some of this has been discussed as, another way to justify or validate the cost. I think where we've struggled, and we've seen this in a couple other states too, when we're developing it, is that the EPCR data doesn't always talk to the Medicaid data. And so then how do you get the state system to talk to, these EPCR systems?
Yeah, and just to add, Alyssa, one thing I would also just mention is, so initially CMS, came out with we're no longer accepting the use of CAD. And then it seemed that they jumped to, proposing the time studies. What we've proposed as, CAD is the use of CAD, continued use of CAD is definitely sort of our number one option. But we have started to propose some alternatives to CMS because we know that the time study could be very detrimental and inaccurate in terms of capturing the appropriate reimbursable activities and what that would mean for reimbursement as a whole. So a couple of things we have explored are vehicle staffing components and kind of giving them that information so that they could kind of use that based on the vehicle that responded to the incidents. How many of those staff are certified to provide EMS. We've been looking at sort of a couple different variations of that, but one of the things that has also been discussed through that context is some use of EPCR data. How can we leverage any data that's being captured today to help substantiate the costs that are being included in the cost report? So I think some combination of CAD and EPCR would still be more beneficial to providers and more accurate, really, in terms of capturing allowable costs, allowable time than a time study would be. So definitely not something that is we're completely opposed to. It's not something that CMS has reacted to too favorably, but it is an option that's being explored.
All right. Well, again, thank you to the three of you and PCG for for sponsoring today, and hope that everybody. I know that I even learned some stuff today, and it's stuff that we've been talking about for the last year or so. So again, thank you, and thanks for all the attendees. There are attachments and handouts. If you go up to the button just next to the Q&A, there are some handouts there. And again, thanks to PCG. A couple of upcoming events here are, can't even see that. That's how terrible my eyes are. But we've got a Symposium in the Sun, which is November 9th through the 12th, which is actually in Clearwater, Florida. That's an in-person conference. December 5th through the 7th is the Technology Summit International, which is in Irving, Texas. We've got a couple more events. March 26th through the 28th, Wildland Urban Interface Conference, which is in Nevada. And then May 14th to the 16th, Community Risk Reduction Leadership Conference, which is in Glendale, Arizona. So hope to see a bunch of you there. You'll receive a link to today's recording via email along with a brief survey. Please let us know about your experience. We would appreciate the feedback. And then again, thank you for all who attended, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Everybody have a great day. Be safe.
Thank you.